Why you feel different from everyone else is not because you are broken. It is not because you are superior. And it is not because you are imagining it. According to Carl Jung, feeling fundamentally different is often the earliest sign that the psyche is beginning to individuate. Individuation is not about becoming special. It is about becoming whole. But long before wholeness is felt as peace, it is felt as alienation. Many people grow up sensing that they do not fully belong. They learn the rules, mimic the language, play the roles expected of them, yet something remains out of sync. Conversations feel shallow. Social norms feel artificial. The pace of the world feels wrong. This difference is not always visible. Often, it is deeply internal. You may smile at the right moments, laugh at the right jokes, say the right things, and yet, inwardly, you feel like an observer rather than participant. Jung believed this feeling arises when a person's inner life is more developed than the collective environment they inhabit. Their psyche is oriented toward meaning, depth, and integration, while the surrounding world prioritizes conformity, efficiency, and surface identity. This creates tension. The individual senses more than can be expressed, feels more than can be shared, thinks in patterns that do not fit common language, and so they feel different, not because they reject others consciously, but because their inner orientation does not align with the collective rhythm. Jung warned that modern society rewards adaptation far more than authenticity. From an early age, people learn which traits are acceptable and which must be hidden. Over time, this creates a persona, the social mask that allows us to function. For most people, the persona becomes their identity. But for some, it never fully fits. These individuals feel the strain of living through a mask. They sense that something essential is being suppressed. And although they may not have words for it yet, the psyche begins to signal discomfort. Restlessness appears. Boredom with routine deepens. A quiet sadness emerges without obvious cause. This is not pathology. It is the psyche calling attention to itself. Jung believed that when the inner world is ignored for too long, it creates symptoms, not to punish, but to redirect consciousness. Feeling different is one of those symptoms. It is the unconscious saying, "There is more to you than this." However, this awareness often comes with loneliness. When you feel different, you may try to explain yourself, only to be misunderstood. You may seek connection, only to feel unseen. You may even try to suppress your depth to fit in better. But suppression has a cost. The more you deny your inner complexity, the more fragmented you feel. Energy drains. Motivation fades. Life begins to feel mechanical. Jung observed that many people become depressed not because life is meaningless, but because they are living against their own nature. Your sense of difference may be the result of an inner life that demands expression. You may be more reflective, more intuitive, more sensitive to contradictions and falsehoods, more aware of unspoken emotional dynamics. These traits do not thrive in environments built on speed and distraction, so you feel out of place. But being out of place is not always a flaw. Sometimes it means you are early. Jung believed that the individuating person often feels isolated because they are no longer fully governed by collective values. They begin to question assumptions others accept unconsciously. Why do we live this way? Why do we chase these things? Why does everyone seem so busy avoiding themselves? These questions are unsettling to the group, so they're often ignored or dismissed. The individual who asks them feels even more different. This difference can be painful, especially if you internalize it as failure. Many people do. They assume something is wrong with them, that they are socially deficient, emotionally awkward, too much or not enough. But Jung would say the opposite may be true. Your difference may indicate that your psyche is oriented toward integration rather than adaptation. Integration is harder. It requires facing inner contradictions instead of smoothing them over. It requires tolerating ambiguity instead of rushing to certainty. It requires solitude, reflection, and honesty. Most people avoid this work. Those who do not avoid it often feel alone. But this loneliness is not a dead end. It is a threshold, because once you stop trying to eliminate your difference, you can begin to understand it. And understanding changes everything. To understand why you feel different, you must understand what most people are doing to survive. They are adapting. According to Carl Jung, adaptation is not the same as development. Adaptation allows a person to function in society. Development allows a person to become whole. The problem is that modern life rewards a first and quietly punishes a second. From childhood, most people learn to suppress whatever does not fit. Sensitivity becomes weakness. Curiosity becomes impractical. Emotional depth becomes inconvenience. Over time, these qualities are pushed into the unconscious. This creates the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It is unlived life. For many people, the shadow holds creativity, feeling, vulnerability, intuition, and truth. But instead of integrating these qualities, they project them outward or deny them entirely. You, however, may not have been able to deny them so easily. If you feel different, it may be because your psyche refused full repression. Something in you remained aware, awake, attentive. This awareness makes conformity painful. You notice contradictions others ignore. You feel emotional undercurrents others dismiss. You sense when people are pretending, sometimes even when they are pretending to themselves. This makes social interaction exhausting, not because you dislike people, but because you're constantly processing more than what is being said. Jung believed that highly sensitive and intuitive individuals are often burdened early with awareness they are not taught how to manage. Without guidance, this awareness turns inward as self-doubt. Why can't I just be normal? Why does everything feel so intense? Why do I feel disconnected even when I'm surrounded by people? These questions arise because your inner experience does not match the external script. Most people operate through habit, through roles, through borrowed beliefs. They are not lying, just unconscious. But when you are more conscious, these habits feel hollow. You may find small talk draining, routine conversations meaningless, social games confusing or repulsive, not because you are above them, but because you are oriented towards something else. Jung called this orientation introversion of libido, not shyness, but an inward movement of psychic energy. Instead of flowing outward toward status and approval, your energy moves inward toward understanding and meaning. This inward pull often isolates people. The world does not pause to accommodate inner life. It demands speed, output clarity, certainty. But the psyche develops slowly, in symbols, in contradictions, in cycles, so you feel out of sync. Another reason you may feel different is that you are more aware of your shadow than others are of theirs. When you recognize your own flaws, contradictions, and darker impulses, you become less interested in pretending to be perfect. But this honesty can create distance. People who rely on denial feel exposed around those who are self-aware. Your presence may make others uncomfortable, not because you judge them, but because you remind them of what they are avoiding. So they may dismiss you, label you strange, too quiet, too intense, too sensitive. These labels are defenses. Jung observed that groups often marginalize individuals who reflect what the group oppresses. The different, one becomes a container for what the collective does not want to see. This can make you feel isolated even when you are not alone. But here is the crucial insight. Feeling different is often the price of not abandoning yourself. You may have noticed that whenever you try to fully conform, to dull your perceptions, ignore your intuition, or suppress your questions, you feel worse, not better. This is because your psyche resists fragmentation. It wants coherence. And coherence requires integration, not imitation. Jung believed that the path toward wholeness always begins with separation. Not physical separation necessarily, but psychological differentiation. You must first recognize that you are not the same before you can relate authentically. This stage is uncomfortable. You may feel like you exist between worlds, no longer fully belonging to the collective, but not yet fully anchored in yourself. This is the danger point. Many people retreat here. They numb themselves, distract themselves, or force themselves back into conformity. But those who endure this phase discover something essential. Their difference is not an error. It is information. It tells them where their psyche wants to grow. As the sense of difference deepens, loneliness often follows. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of not being met. You may be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. Conversations happen, words are exchanged, laughter occurs, but something essential is missing. You leave interactions feeling emptier than before, as if you participated in something that never truly touched you. According to Carl Jung, this kind of loneliness is not a social failure. It is a psychological signal. It tells you that your inner life is no longer satisfied by surface connection. Most people bond through shared habits, shared complaints, shared distractions. These bonds are not false, but they're limited. They do not reach into the deeper layers of the psyche where meaning lives. When your psyche begins to seek meaning rather than stimulation, old forms of belonging lose their grip. This is where solitude enters. Solitude is often misunderstood. It is seen as isolation, withdrawal, or sadness. But Jung made a sharp distinction between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is imposed. Solitude is chosen. Loneliness drains you. Solitude restores you. People who feel different often discover, sometimes reluctantly, that solitude feels more nourishing than forced connection. Silence becomes preferable to noise. Being alone becomes safer than being misunderstood. This can be frightening at first. The collective teaches us that being alone means something is wrong, that it signals rejection or inadequacy. But Jung argued the opposite. Solitude is essential for psychological development. Without solitude, the psyche cannot hear itself. When you are constantly surrounded by others' expectations, emotions, and opinions, your inner voice is drowned out. You live reactively, adjusting yourself to fit external demands. Solitude interrupts this pattern. In solitude, questions emerge that were previously buried. What do I actually want? What feels true to me? What am I avoiding by staying busy? These questions do not demand immediate answers. They reshape you simply by being asked. This is why solitude can feel uncomfortable at first. It removes distractions. It exposes inner contradictions. It forces honesty. Many people avoid solitude for this reason, but those who feel different are often pushed into it anyway. Social environments feel alienating. Small talk feels exhausting. Group dynamics feel artificial. And so, gradually you step back. At first, this withdrawal may feel like loss. But over time, something shifts. You begin to notice that your thoughts deepen. Your dreams become more vivid. Your intuition sharpens. You feel more connected to yourself than you ever did while trying to belong everywhere. Jung believed that meaning emerges not from constant interaction, but from reflection. Meaning requires digestion, and digestion happens in stillness. This is why people who feel different often develop rich inner worlds. They think in images, symbols, metaphors. They're drawn to art, philosophy, psychology, spirituality, not as hobbies, but as necessities. These domains speak the language of the inner life. They validate experiences that cannot be easily explained. They provide maps for terrain you already sense exists. Through this engagement, a crucial realization begins to form. Belonging is not the same as alignment. You can belong everywhere and still feel empty, or you can align with yourself and feel whole, even if fewer people understand you. This realization marks a turning point. You stop measuring your worth by how well you fit in. You stop forcing yourself into spaces that drain you. You stop apologizing for needing depth. Instead, you begin to orient your life around resonance. What feels alive? What feels honest? What feels meaningful, even if it is difficult? These questions guide you more reliably than social approval ever could. Jung believed that the individual who follows meaning rather than belonging eventually finds a different kind of connection. Not with everyone, but with the right few. Connections form from shared depth rather than shared distraction. But before those connections appear, there's often a long stretch of solitude. This is not a punishment. It is preparation. The psyche is reorganizing itself. Old identities are dissolving. New values are forming. The self you were taught to be is giving way to the self you actually are. This process cannot be rushed. If you try to escape it prematurely, by forcing yourself back into conformity, you interrupt development. You trade growth for comfort. Those who endure it emerge changed. They no longer fear being alone. They no longer equate silence with emptiness. They no longer depend on constant validation to feel real. They carry their own center. And once the center forms, the feeling of being different changes meaning. It is no longer a wound. It becomes orientation. There comes a moment when the question changes. You stop asking, "Why don't I fit in?" And you begin asking, "What am I here to become?" According to Carl Jung, this shift marks the final stage of individuation. The individual no longer measures themselves against the collective. They no longer seek reassurance that their inner experience is valid. They trust it. At this stage, feeling different no longer feels like a flaw. It feels like alignment. You recognize that much of your discomfort came from trying to live a life that was never designed for your psyche. You were forcing yourself into rhythms that did not match your nature, values that did not nourish you, definitions of success that felt empty. Once you stop forcing yourself to belong everywhere, something remarkable happens. Your energy returns. The constant tension of self-monitoring fades. The need to explain yourself dissolves. You no longer feel compelled to justify your depth, your sensitivity, or your need for meaning. You become quieter, not because you have nothing to say, but because you no longer speak to be accepted. This quiet carries authority. Jung believed that true authority does not come from dominance or recognition. It comes from inner coherence. When thoughts, feeling, and actions align, the psyche stabilizes. You move differently now. You choose carefully. You listen deeply. You walk away without drama when something feels wrong. Not because you are detached, but because you are rooted. People may still misunderstand you. Some may distance themselves. Others may feel intimidated by your calm or your refusal to perform. But these reactions no longer define you. You understand that not everyone is meant to understand you, and that is no longer painful. The need to be seen by everyone disappears when you finally see yourself. This is a paradox Jung describes so clearly. The more individuated a person becomes, the less they need validation, and the more real their connections become. Your relationships grow fewer, but deeper. Conversations slow down. Silence becomes comfortable. You recognize resonance immediately and no longer waste energy forcing chemistry where there is none. Most importantly, you stop doubting your inner signals. You trust when something feels off. You trust when something feels true. You trust your own pace. This trust becomes your compass. Life does not suddenly become easy. Challenges remain. Loss still occurs. Uncertainty does not disappear. But you no longer experience these things as signs that something is wrong with you. You experience them as part of a meaningful process. Jung believed that meaning, not happiness, is what sustains the human soul. And meaning arises when you live in accordance with your inner nature, not against it. If you feel different, it may be because your psyche refuses to live a borrowed life. It may be because you are not meant to blend into the background, not meant to chase what everyone else chases, not meant to numb yourself to survive. You are meant to integrate, to hold depth without apology, to live deliberately, to walk a path that makes sense to you, even if it confuses others. When you accept this, the feeling of being different transforms. It no longer isolates you. It orients you. You stop asking how to belong, and you begin living from who you are. That is not separation from humanity. That is the beginning of real connection.